Yes, go ahead.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Nice to see so many of you have joined us again this week. Can't believe we're already on session three. We've already had an initial session looking at an overview of the foundation of financial well-being. Last week we looked at savings and the importance of emergency funds, and this week we'll be looking at saving, investing, property, and passive income. So, quite a lot to cover this evening. So, without further ado, we'll begin, and we'll be doing a double act this evening. So, there's myself, and my background is financial services. And then we've also got Pastor Endabelli, who is a pastor and a coach, very qualified IT consultant, entrepreneur, and very interested in this subject area. So you've heard from both of us so far. So we'll continue that theme this evening, but I think this time you'll hear from both of us almost in equal proportions, whereas last week it was mainly myself and the first week it was Pastor Endabelli. This week we'll do more of a double act and share the slides as we go through. So we're looking at moving towards financial freedom. This is beyond the paycheck. What can you do to earn passive income, additional income to just going to your regular employment, earning a salary, a wage, and that's it. We're looking at what can you do to move towards financial freedom. And tonight we've got a number of areas that we'll be looking at. The employee trap. Let's just clear this. The cash flow quadrant. Where do you stand? We'll look at the state of the nation's finances, the four asset classes to building wealth, passive income in practice, and choosing the right path for you. Because we're all different, our circumstances are different, therefore, it's not one size fits all. So, we'll be looking at that in detail this evening. And we're going to start with this slide. It might look a bit busy, but basically, we're looking at the financial freedom pipeline. Now, as I said before, we've talked about budgeting and how important it is that we know where every pound goes because we don't want any leakage and we do want to be able to manage our finances and manage them well. Once we do that, we're able to build an emergency fund, which is really essential, especially if there's a crisis. Car might break down, the boiler might break down, anything like that. You may have to visit a foreign country at short notice. If you don't have any emergency funds, you've got a crisis straight away. So it's really important that you build sufficient funds to cover at least 3 to 6 months worth of expenses. Then we want to eliminate debt. We talked about that last week, so I'm not going to go into detail, but it's making sure that we get rid of the high interest debt first, or maybe doing the waterfall where we get rid of the smaller debts and then we lead to the bigger ones, or consolidate the debts where we can and put them on the mortgage. And then we talked about protection, how important it is to have life insurance, income protection, critical illness cover. Some of these protections come as an employee benefit as part of your employment package. But if you're self employed, then it's really important that you put these things in place for yourself. And in this far right column here, this is where we'll be focusing tonight on investing and building assets, passive income, in order to generate financial freedom. And where we get to with the passive income is that money is working for you. Instead of you working for money, we're going to invest the money in a way that the money will earn an income for you. So, in addition to your self employment, your regular employment, you'll also be earning dividends or investment growth from the assets that you invest in. So, we're looking at the employee trap. Why do we call it
Okay.
an employee trap? Over to you, Pastor Endabelli.
Yes, so thank you so much for that pipeline is critical because we are not asking you to budget for the sake of budgeting. If you're serious about building financial freedom, you need to know your numbers. And then you need to protect the plan because sometimes our plans goes haywire whenever we are faced with an emergency because we did not plan, we did not have enough contingency. So derails our plans because we didn't have that cushion. And then the debt, you need to stop the bleed. When you have debt, you are a target for somebody else's passive income. Did you hear that? When you have debt, you are a source of passive income to somebody else. So you need to stop the rot and stop the bleed. And then, of course, you do the protection. And hopefully, when you release all of these funds, they are then enabling you to be in a position to build assets. So the next slide is talking about the employment trap. I talked about first session that the employment rules and the way the whole world works is not intended to make you financially independent. It's intended to keep you living from hand to mouth, from paycheck to paycheck. And how is that set up? You trade, basically, when you're an employee, you're trading time for income. The day you stop working, especially in the gig economy, income stops. And then the next thing is that your employee pay is the most heavily taxed. You are taxed before you spend. Whereas if you move to the business side, you are taxed after you pay your expenses. And so, generally speaking, people who are employed find themselves, as much as they would like to build assets and equity, something that can generate income for them, they find that their salary is not capable of building equity. There is no residual income left, and therefore you have no leverage for building that additional capacity to build assets. And you just have a single income stream. You are financially fragile to any disruption. Anything happens, you are in trouble. So we need to find a way to escape this financial rat race, this employee trap, by finding methods or means of generating passive income. So Robert Kiyosaki, one of the people I've read, he says, the poor and the middle class work for money. And look at the difference in the mindset for the rich. The rich have money work for them. And they usually make you know about it, and they are lounging themselves by the seaside and
Absolutely.
enjoying life,
Yeah.
while something earns them some money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide about how this whole thing works, the quadrant. Now, the cash flow quadrant is, first of all, it's got these four areas where most of us operate in. So the first quadrant is really an employee, and the vast majority of the world's population are in this quadrant, and it's designed on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You work for a company, you trade time for money, and you are the highest tax rate, and you have zero leverage to build any assets. Unless you're intentional, you retire poor with a very little bit of pension and just scrapping around to make ends meet. And then some of us will think we will do better, and we move to the S quadrant. That's the self-employment quadrant. You own a job, not a business, but you are a single person that is working for that business. The day you stop working for the business, income stops. It's a little bit better because you are in control of your own destiny, but it's still time limited. You are the limit to the growth of the company.
Yes,
And
that's
maybe
true.
in some cases, you might be in a worse position than an employee because if you
Yeah,
stop working, there's no sick leave, there's no holiday leave, there isn't any of that organizational protection that we talked about last week.
yeah, the security
Then
of having a
the
job.
security of employment, yes.
Hmm.
And then you come to the business owner. The systems there, you begin to leverage systems to work for you. Other people's time and other people's skills are used or deployed to generate income for you. And
Hmm.
this can scale. So you've seen businesses opening up in one town and moving on to another town, et cetera, et cetera. So if you come up with a model that works, you can then replicate it and scale it using other people's time, using other people's skills, and having a very good system that then begins to generate money for you, and you don't have to stand over it or nurse it. And then the final quadrant is an investor. Here, this is where most of the rich will operate. They call them tax havens. You know, you work very hard and you put your money in the local bank. They don't put their money there. They invest it in tax havens, and money begins to work for them. They are the lowest effective tax rate, in some cases zero tax completely, and you begin to build assets towards full financial independence. So the goal is to move from the left to the right, self-employment, or if you're a business, moving towards being an investor. Let's move on to the next slide. So in the next slide, there are some slight differences on tax. I've put this in your workbook, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Tax on employees is pretty much the same in the US and in the UK, but in the UK, they have some,
Tax
what do you
efficient
call it?
products. Yeah,
They've
tax
got, yeah,
efficient products.
products. They've got products that can help you even when you are an employee, such as ISAs and pensions, which can be leveraged to help you build even from an employee position. Whereas in the US, there isn't any of that. Property, yeah, since 2017, the property game has changed. Tax is no longer as favorable as it used to be, and it's quite a high risk area, but we'll talk about that later on.
Hmm.
Buy to let, again, there's a lot of people there playing in the buy to let. The structure is different in the UK to the US. So when you read on the internet and you search around to inform yourself, you need to be aware of the differences, the nuances that operate across the pond. Capital gains, again, as your property increases in value, the government wants 18% of the difference. If it's a residential
When you come to
property,
sell it. Yes, when you come
when you
to
come
sell
to
it.
sell it, yes,
Hmm.
you have to pay that amount of money. So there are ways, again, of mitigating those kind of payments that can be deployed. So the core principle here is acquire assets that put money in your pocket. Now, some of us think that my car is an asset. Unless you are running a taxi business on that car, or finding a way of generating income from a car is not an asset, it's a liability.
Mm.
And that difference is very important to note. Anything that does not put money in your pocket and takes money out of your pocket every week to put fuel and you're not getting anything back is a liability. It's not an asset. So we're
Yeah,
talking about building assets here.
that's
Thank
right.
you.
And there might be
So
some cars that are investments, but they are few and far between. They're rare.
that's,
They may be
yeah,
vintage cars, but we're talking about the everyday car that people
yeah,
drive are not assets.
yeah. So this is the employment cycle that we're trying to help each one of us on the platform today to get away. It's structurally designed to limit your wealth. because we only want the top 2% and the top 5% to own the world. And that's how it operates throughout the world. So
Hmm.
you earn a salary, you pay the highest amount of tax, you pay bills and have a bit of a lifestyle, and there's very little left over to save or to invest. And so the cycle goes and repeats until you retire and you pass on the baton to your next generation, and they are still in that rat race.
Yeah.
So we are looking at ways of how can we escape this trap.
And it's not
Thank
just the
you.
limited income, it's the limited time to enjoy that income, to do the things
Yes.
that you've always wanted to do, but you've only got 4 weeks worth of holidays each year.
Yeah.
The rich have a constant holiday because of their investments.
So next slide. I think it's
Yeah.
over to you, Laverne. Yeah.
Okay. Whoops. Let me just go back on that one. So, yeah, we're looking at the FCA survey. We touched on some of this last week anyway, but it's just a reminder that 10% of adults have no cash savings at all. 24% of UK adults have low financial resilience, i.e., if something untoward happens, they're not able to bounce back. 49% of UK adults show characteristics of vulnerability. They're just on the edge of potentially losing everything. If they lost their job, that would be it. 35% of adults hold any investments whatsoever, and of the investments that they hold, 90% have all of it in cash. 61% with 10,000 plus of investable assets keep 75% of it in cash, and 1/3 of adults with a defined contribution pension have less than £10,000 saved. So, as you can see, for the majority of UK adults, they're not in the best financial position. From a security, financial freedom point of view, they have limited ability to withdraw themselves from a regular job, paying a regular salary, because they don't have enough invested that they could live off in a crisis or even if things were to change marginally. So, what's the psychology behind the reasons why we sabotage ourselves? And don't get me wrong, there are some people in jobs earning very good salaries. So, although they are giving their time, they are being well rewarded. But again, from a time point of view, in terms of having the options to enjoy the income that they're earning, they're still on a limited number of annual leave days that they can take. So, if anything, it's the family that's probably enjoying the wealth more than they are because they're having to be in the office, in the job for 60, 70, 80 hours a week plus, even if they are being handsomely rewarded. So in the FCA 2024 survey, 61% of people, as I said, had £10,000 or more in investable assets, in cash, but over 3/4 of that cash was invested in a savings account as opposed to being invested in the stock market. And the reason why we do that, the psychology is we're afraid to lose money. We feel losses twice as much than we feel gain. So it's when we make money, it feels good, but if we lose it, it feels doubly bad. And that's why we don't like to invest. There's a present bias. We overvalue the present over the future. So we'd rather have that money today than save it for the future because, hey, we might not live to see 30 years. B, in 30 years, anything could happen. We could have wars, we could have all sorts of changes in society. So we'd rather spend what we have now than save for an uncertain future. There's a status quo bias as well. Sometimes we prefer doing nothing over making a change because why? It involves too much effort. And that's why we don't like to change. And so that results in poor savings rates, unreviewed pensions. Do you know how well your pensions are performing? Should you switch funds? Should you seek an advisor? We tend not to do anything. Then there's the herd mentality. We follow the crowd. So if the crowd is buying a stock and it's already risen 100%, we want to jump on board and buy that same stock. But that's not the time to buy a stock when it's already gone up 50%, 100%. We want to buy low and sell high. But unfortunately, the psychology is if we see a stock that's fallen, we tend to think, oh, I'm not going to buy that one because it's fallen in value. But that could be a really good opportunity for you to buy what they call in the dip. So we've seen certain times where the markets have fallen. We saw with COVID, we saw with President Trump announcing tariffs and the market kept dipping. Those were the best opportunities to go in and buy some of the well-known stocks, the technology stocks that fell at the same time and have since recovered and more. So it's that herd mentality. Then there's the overconfidence. Sometimes we feel that we can pick a winner. Well, there is no such thing as being able to pick a winner consistently. Sometimes you'll win, sometimes you'll lose. But where you'll tend to gain is if you hold things for the long term. So when you're investing, you're looking to hold for at least 5 years or more. And then there's the mental accounting. We treat money differently depending on where it came from. So the result is that spending a bonus while keeping untouchable savings, earning near zero interest. And people do that. They'd rather keep the money in the bank than put it in their pension or put it in a term deposit account or invest that money. So the antidote is automate your savings and investments, remove the decision from your hands entirely. Sometimes when you have to make those decisions, it's harder if it's not on an automatic basis where you've got that direct debit or you're putting a certain amount every month into your ISA, your pension. You don't actually see it, so you don't feel it in the same way. And it's like when you spend money with cash versus spending on a credit card. It's very easy to spend on a credit card because you don't actually feel the literal cash moving from your wallet to the shopkeeper or whatever it is where you're spending. But when you're spending cash, you're a bit more careful how you spend that cash. And it's the same psychology. So we're looking at what scripture has to say. And, as I mentioned last week, the book of Proverbs is full of so much wisdom, but especially financial wisdom, because God was the first and still is the best financial advisor. So in Ecclesiastes 11, verse 2, it talks about diversification. Invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8, because you do not know what disaster may come upon the land. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. Put them in many different types of assets, equities, whatever it is. Spread the investment. So if one goes down, you still have the opportunity for 6 to at least perform better or go up in value or at least not fall in value. So you want to diversify your investments. You want to put money to work, which is what Pastor Annabelli was saying before. And this is found in Matthew 25, verse 27, where they're talking about the parable of the talents. And the master comes along and asks one of those who he'd given a talent to, what have you done with the money that I gave you? And obviously he said, I'd buried it in the ground. And the master said, well, then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. But instead the servant did nothing with the talent that the master had given him. And then you want to be patient. Get rich quick schemes fail. They fail abysmally. So what you need to do is to be consistent and disciplined when it comes to investing. In Proverbs 13:11 it says, wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. And that is so true. And there's a thing called pound cost averaging. When you're looking to invest and you do that on a regular monthly basis, the markets may go up and down, but what you're going to do is get the average for the year rather than putting everything in at the start of the year. The market falls and then you've got a loss on your investments. If you do little and often, you'll get the average price over the course of the year, and then your losses won't be as great and your gains might not be as great, but at least you'll see some gain rather than a complete loss. And the main thing to do is to stay humble and do good. So 1 Timothy 6 verse 17 to 18, it says, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, but to put their hope in God, to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous. And that is so important, that whatever gains we achieve in this life, we recognize that it comes from God, but we use that to bless and help others. So overall, we say diversify, put your money to work, be patient, stay humble and generous, and from a biblical point of view, remain a good steward, knowing that everything that you have came from God in the first place. He's the one that gave you the ability to gain the wealth. And so we recognize that because of his goodness towards us, we will use that wealth to help others, just as God has used it to help us. So we've got the 4 asset classes then to build wealth. We've looked at cash and savings last week, so I don't need to go back into detail on that. But when we're looking at things like bonds, they're things like gilt. You may have heard the term gilt, which is a government bond. It's a fixed interest instrument, so it's like a loan. So let's say if you bought a bond and the value is £100, it may have a coupon which is 5%. And that means that that bond will pay you 5% of the original £100 each year. And there's normally a term attached to it. It could be a 10-year bond, a 15-year bond, whatever it is, but it will pay that coupon rate for as long as you hold that bond. Now, the good thing with a bond is that it can be sold in the market. So if you did want to realise your capital, you could easily sell that in the market, get your money back. The coupon would then be paid to the next person that bought that bond from you. But it is a tradable instrument. It provides a fixed income stream. It's less volatile than equities. Well, it used to be, but over the last couple of years, we've seen that bonds are just as volatile as equities, if not more so. And then government gilts are deemed to be low risk. But again, because of the geopolitical things that we're seeing in the world at the moment, and governments being over leveraged, and we're not seeing bonds being as low risk and low volatility as we used to. The risks are, though, that they are sensitive to interest rates. So when interest rates go up, bond rates go down. The returns are very modest, but they do or they can be eroded by inflation. The next asset class is equities. We all know what equities are. It's stocks and shares. You've probably heard of people who have a trading 212 account where you can go on there and you can either buy individual stocks and shares or you can buy things that are called ETFs. They're exchange traded funds and they tend to be an index of shares. So rather than holding one share, it's diversified maybe across 100 shares or more, but it's an index that you'd buy like an S&P 500 or a Nasdaq index, and so you get exposure to the index itself rather than any individual fund in that index. It's historically provided good long-term returns. Dividend incomes are possible as well, and you have full diversification within the fund itself. The risk is the values fluctuate significantly, so as the markets go up or down, your investment will do likewise. It requires patience and discipline, and that's the case with all investments, and there is no capital guarantee. When you invest in a single fund, you could actually lose everything that you have invested. So again, it pays to do your homework and be wise. Go for the bigger stocks because it's less likely that they will go out of business. Sometimes the smaller stocks can give you the quickest and greatest returns, but they do come with risk. And then last but not least, we've got property. And we all know that you can earn a rental income from property. It can increase in value. The equity portion of the property can increase in value. And you normally have a mortgage, and that's called debt, which we say leverage against the property. You may have to put down 10% deposit, and then you've got the amount of debt that's still being serviced. And once you sell the property, you pay the debt back to the lender, but then anything above the price that you originally paid is called equity and you can keep that. The risks are it's illiquid. So with property, you can't just sell it straight away. If you needed access to the money, it's going to take at least 6 to 12 months to sell the property. There might be some areas where houses go really quickly, but on average, it will take 6 to 12 months to get your money out of the property, unlike the other assets here, cash and savings, bonds and equities, where it's more or less immediate. You sell the equities, you go to the bank, you take the cash out of the bank, it's immediate. Concentration risk, it's a high capital asset. So, buying a property is going to cost you a lot more than it would do putting a few £1,000s into equities or bonds. You're going to be putting at least £200,000 or more in a property. And then when it comes to the cost side of things, you've got repairs, you've got tax, you've got void periods when you may not have a tenant in the property, but you'll still have to cover the mortgage. So these are the different asset classes. They come with their benefits, but they also come with their disadvantages. So again, do your homework and see how much could you afford to lose and when would you need access to the funds that are being invested. So the cash trap, we've talked about the median cash savings. Previously, most people have less than £10,000 saved. But if you're putting it in A current account or a savings account, the interest rate is typically quite low. I mean, probably 1.5%, 2%. And when you look at inflation, inflation is running at 3% and likely to increase throughout the rest of the year. So again, putting money into a bank account is not earning money for you. It could be depreciating in value. And when it comes to pensions, if you have been paying your national insurance contributions towards a state pension, at the moment it would be worth just over £12,500. I don't know about you, but most people can't really live on £12,500 a year, especially if you retire and you still have a mortgage to pay. So you need to think about, what can I do to make my money work harder for me? So with property, Pastor, would you like to talk about this one?
Yes. So with property, then what we see, in spite of what we see around regarding the level of construction that's going on, number of high-rise buildings that are going up, home ownership is still falling, which means it is creating an opportunity for people who are smart investors to provide rental accommodation for people who cannot afford to buy their own properties. And this is through a buy-to-let model,
Sorry about
um, where you where you buy to let, as Laverne mentioned earlier. You can get 60% or 75% is usually the norm uh, mortgage to acquire a property by putting in the 25 or the 15% equity into the property, and then you get hold of the asset. And that when you are controlling that asset, it then generates income for you. So you can see here how many people own a mortgage. On properties with a mortgage is still about 29% in 2024 of people in the population. And people who own their properties outright is 28%. And people who are renting is 32%. About a third of the population of adults require accommodation. So that means there's an opportunity for you to provide rental accommodation for people, notwithstanding the risks that were mentioned. There's a law that has just come into operation, Renters' Rights Bill, which means it's much more difficult to
evict a
manage,
tenant. Yeah.
to evict tenants who are not paying. And the legal system is jam-locked with delays. It could be up to 18 months where you are meeting the mortgage requirement when you're not getting anything while somebody is still living in the property, and you still have responsibility to make sure that that accommodation is serviceable,
Yeah.
and you are keeping the repairs and you're keeping it to a standard even though you're not receiving rent. So it's not risk free. Like anything else we have talked about, there are pros and there are cons for participating using this particular instrument to generate wealth for yourself and in the future.
Yes. But as you've put here at the bottom of the slide, if you did want to have some kind of exposure to property, you could invest in what's called a real estate investment trust. And that's
Yeah.
like a share, but instead of it being a Microsoft or a Nvidia or something like that, this company invests in property, typically commercial property. And so by investing in a REIT, that's what they call it, you would have exposure to the property market. So that's your way of getting it at a much lower level than buying it yourself. Because as you can see, buying it yourself, you need tens of thousands of pounds to put down, whether it's 20,000, 30,000. Whereas in a REIT, you could invest £500, £1,000, £200. You can start small and build up your exposure to property. So if we go on to the next slide then, building passive income. Unfortunately, I've put this thing here and I don't know how to get rid of it. I don't know if somebody knows how to do that, but just ignore that green line there. That's me moving the mouse. So building passive income streams. Again, this is Rich Dad's goal. Pastor, do you want to talk about this one?
Yes. So the goal here is when we're talking about passive income, we are talking about income that you're not spending hours generating or over. It's money that comes while you are sleeping. It's money that comes while you are abroad, like I am right now. And there are things that are still generating income for you.
Mm-hmm.
So using the instruments that we talked about, the different avenues, whether it's bonds, whether it's stocks, or whether it's property, you are looking to being in a position where you're getting regular payments from either company profits, returns are historically outpace inflation. So if you got Legal in General, for example, is an insurance company, and you got several uh, shares in that particular, not shares. What's the term I'm looking for? You've invested
Yeah, it would be
in
shares. It would be shares that you would
shares
invest.
in
Yeah,
Legal in General,
yeah.
and at the end of the year, or twice a year,
They
they
pay a
would then
dividend.
pay you
Yeah,
a dividend.
yeah.
In other words, it's a share of the profits that they've made
Correct.
across all the investments.
Mm-hmm.
And if you choose a particular method called reinvesting that dividend, instead of getting money if you don't need it, that money is then used to buy more shares into that portfolio. And so next year, you actually generate a bigger dividend according to how the company performs. So dividends are one way of increasing or generating passive income. Once you have invested, the interest will come to you either as cash if you will need to use it, or you can reinvest it in order to continue building your asset class
Yeah,
in that particular area. So the effort is low and the risk obviously is medium because can go up and can go down.
mm-hmm.
Uh, Rental property, you can get monthly rental income. FCA says 32% of UK now rents. So that's a very high number of people that will continue to require accommodation. And on top of that, with property, on average in London, for example, property values increase at 66% per year. So I know of an example of a property that was bought in the mid 80s for about £50,000. That's now in the region of 400,000. That's the capital growth,
Yeah,
not counting the rental income that you would have enjoyed from 1988 to today. So it can be quite lucrative, but the landscape obviously has changed now.
changed
Property
significantly.
uh, property prices are much higher, and you're not likely to experience or have that capital gain or that capital growth as much as happened in before. Bonds and gilts, again, fixed interest income, government bonds, they are low default risk if you believe governments can't fail.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, there are some bonds that they're still paying from the slave trade. If you read, governments are still paying. So there's a lot of income that you can get from there, the passive income. Index funds, and we've heard about ETFs. This is a broad market exposure, low cost, diversified, and you get compound growth. So all of these asset classes that we talked about can generate passive income for you. Even if they've fallen in value, they will still give a dividend.
Yeah,
And then you've heard about ISAs and pensions. We will spend a lot more time next session talking about pensions in detail. But you get some really good tax wrappers around pensions, both from the government and also from your company that employs you. And you get these tax-free growth wrappers. And ISAs, I don't know how many of you, if you've got excess cash, you can invest up to £20,000 a year, and the interest that money generates is tax free. And you can also add more cash into your pension. I believe it was up to 40,000 a year,
60,000 now. It's
up to
60,000.
60,000.
Yeah,
In
depending on how
yeah,
much you earn. But again, we'll cover that next week.
we'll cover that next
Yeah,
week in terms of pensions.
yeah.
So this could be part of laying the ground for future financial freedom.
Hmm.
And then, of course, if you got businesses or if you are a creative, you can get royalties and intellectual property, and businesses can gain a lot of, profit. These are all the sources of passive income that are available, and there are probably more, but these are just in general broad classes of how you can start earning passive income.
Correct. Correct. So work smarter with tax efficient wrappers. We've talked about stocks and shares ISAs. There are cash ISAs as well. Your pensions, they may be called a SIP or a group workplace pension, and a lifetime ISA. All of these, when you invest, grow tax free, not just the income that's generated, but the actual growth in the value of the funds are tax free. The only thing with the pension is when you actually take the money out, the first 25% is tax free, the rest will be taxed at your marginal rate of tax. But if you grow your money in what's called ISAs, be they cash ISA, stocks and shares ISA in the main, then whatever value they're worth, you keep all of that for yourself. And there are people who have been investing in ISAs for the last 10, 15 years, and they are now ISA millionaires simply because of the funds that they had invested in, especially if they were exposed to the US market, technology stocks. They've gone up by so much each year, compound growth, that they have become ISA millionaires. And when they take that money from those products, it's all tax free. There's no income tax, there's no capital gains tax, but there is inheritance tax should they die and leave those funds within their estate. They would have to pay inheritance tax on there. But whilst you're alive, they are excellent, excellent products to invest in if you want your money to grow tax free. So
And
we've
and
talked.
and
Go
before you
on.
move on,
Yes.
these are time limited. It's up to the government. Every year they review these particular schemes in view of their tax regime, and so they are here for now,
Yes.
but there's no guarantee that they will continue to be offered. So if you got a stash of 20K sitting out there in a low interest account, you couldn't do worse by putting them on here. It could be a really blinder in terms
Exactly.
of investing and securing tax from that money and
Yeah.
earning yourself a little bit of interest.
But if you're going to need access to that money within 5 years, then a cash ISA is the one that you should
Yeah.
be looking at. Investments can be quite volatile over a short period of time. And if you are going to invest, you need to get proper advice to do that. Otherwise, that's where people do lose a lot of money. So we talked about knowing what your number is. We're not going to go through this in any detail again, but it's about calculating what your income is, how much income you need to cover your basic expenses, your lifestyle. This is your discretionary expenses, and then what is your number? And that's the target that you're going to try to match when you invest. So if you have a target combined monthly need of X amount, let's say £12,000, sorry, £4,000 a month, that'd be £48,000 a year. And what you'd be looking to do is to make your assets work so that you get to that place where your assets are generating £48,000 a year. Sounds like a very difficult mountain to climb, But the first step is the hardest. And once you do that, it's step by step. And you're looking over the longer period. So maybe where you are now, you're looking to invest until you reach retirement. So not only will you have your pension, but you'll also have those investments as well. But when you do retire and you don't have that steady income that you used to have in your employment, or if you had your own business, you were self-employed, then you're going to be replacing that with the investments that are generating an income for you at that time in your life. So there are two case studies here. What time is it now? Let's have a look. So if we just run through them very, very quickly, we've got the difference between
They
Alex.
are in their workbook. They're in their
They're in the
workbook.
workbook.
So
Okay, so they can
yeah,
look at them in the workbook.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
And basically,
maybe if you mention the overall idea, yeah.
yeah, the overall idea is looking at two individuals. One is an employee, the other one is an asset builder. It doesn't mean that Morgan doesn't have a job, but his mindset has been different from the outset. He's been looking to invest whatever disposable income he has, match his employer's pension contributions because he's saving for his future self. Alex, on the other hand, has probably been more hedonistic, spend what he earns, looking to enjoy life while he's young. But as they approach retirement, the gap at age 50 is significant. Alex, on one hand, has a total of 110,000 saved into his pension, and his monthly income potential from that is about £400 per month. Whereas Morgan, his total defined contribution pension pot is worth just over 500,000, and that would generate approximately £2,800 per month. So differences in behaviour from the outset has led to a significant difference once they reach age 50. And it might be the same level of income that they've been earning, but the mindset has determined one outcome over another. Financial freedom for Alex is not possible. He will still need to work at age 50, whereas for Morgan, he's approaching his goal of being financially free, financially secure. He's not forced to work, and that's just at age 50. Imagine once he gets to age 60, or even before, he could transfer from being an employee to setting up his own business or investing even more to generate more income from his investments, which gives him back more time to do the things that he wants to do, things that are on his bucket list, so to speak. So start early by investing, and it makes a significant difference by the time you reach age 50 or even before then, depending on how much you earn and how much you have to invest from your income, your disposable income that's left over each month. Now, we've talked about property investments, we've talked about buy to let, owning property yourself versus owning property as part of a share, which is what we call a REIT. Um, and this is a public listed company. As I've said before, it pays a dividends. It starts from as little as £50 in a stocks and shares ISA. You can get that money out anytime you want to. Whereas once you own a property yourself, it's going to take you 6 to 12 months to get the money out if you need to. It's tax efficient depending on where it's held. If it's held in an ISA, then as I've said before, there are no income tax consequences of investing or capital gains tax consequences. And diversification, depending on the REIT, you can have exposure to offices, logistics, warehouses, retail, healthcare, so many different sectors within the property market that your REIT will give you exposure to. So here we've got UK REIT sector was up 7.8% year to date in 2025, and JP Morgan forecasts 7.5% annualized returns over the next 10 to 15 years. That's significantly more than you would earn if you put your money in a bank, even if you put it in a cash ISA that was paying between 3.5% and 4%. As you can see, with the REIT, you'd be earning 7.5% per annum. So again, that's going to be a much better investment for you compared to putting your money in cash. With the limited company buy to let, that can make things more tax efficient putting it into a company, but it does add complexity, and you will need to seek specialist advice when you come to sell the property, and even when you come to buy it as well. You'll need that specialist advice to know how to structure the wrapper that you'd put the company into, or the property into. So choosing the right pathway for you is about getting the foundation right first, maximizing tax efficiency when you're looking at investments, knowing your time horizon, and we're looking at 5 years plus. If it's less than 5 years, you're looking at cash and bonds. Anything more than that, you can be looking at equities and property. Diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't just have an exposure to one single stock. Look to spread that across many different equities and funds and different companies that you can invest in. And like I say, seek professional advice. The more risk that you're looking to take, the more advice you need to take, because unless you have a high capacity for loss, there is a high risk that you could lose out by putting it all in the wrong stock or the wrong investment. So this is just, again, reiterating what I've said before. So, an emergency shock, build emergency funds. Job loss, you need to be protected. You need to have savings. Critical illness, what would you do? How would your family survive if you were diagnosed with a critical illness? And that's where protection will come in place to pay your bills or, modify your home if that's what's required. Death, what would happen to your family? That's where you need life insurance, and you definitely need to have a basic will. And retirement, what income will you have to replace your salary once you get into those years of retirement? So these are the things that we want you to think about when you're looking to manage your money and manage it well. So the more your money works for you, the less you have to work for your money. And these are the key takeaways for today. Before we move to any questions, that's the last slide. Before we move to any questions, I'll just check. Pastor, is there anything that you'd like to add to what's been said?
No, no, let's go on to questions.
Okay,
Thank you.
let's go on to questions. So, who would like to be the first this evening?